A lot of people have asked me questions about the different kinds of papers that you can use when you're doing marker drawing, so I thought I'd do a quick tutorial just talking about the kind of papers I've used and how they react with markers. So because this is kind of a scientific experiment, the only thing that was going to be different was the 4 different types of paper that I was going to use. Everything else I wanted to be the same. So I chose cool grey markers from cool grey 1 to number 5. I know a lot of people sometimes just use 1, 3 and 5, or maybe 2, 4 and 5, but I thought I would definitely use number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 and number 5, and I would try and also blend in exactly the same way on each of the papers so that everything is as much the same as possible. So on each one I lay down cool grey 1 over the entire sort of bar that I'm filling in first of all, then I go successively down with 2, 3, 4 and 5. So I'm layering these markers on top of each other while they're still wet in order to try and get the best blend between one shade of grey and the next shade of grey. You can already see on the first one that the marker colours have bled quite a bit outside the pencil lines that I've done, and that's partly due to the technique that I'm using where I'm layering these colours on top of each other while they're still wet. So you need a paper that can really handle all of the moisture content of the paper as you layer these up and up. So with them all finished, you can see them here in daylight, no artificial lighting, just daylight. And it should be no surprise, since I've labelled them, that you can see that printer paper on the left hand side there is the one that has bled the most. It's the thinnest paper technically that I'm using. I'll talk about bleed proof in a minute. And you can see that it has bled quite a bit with 5 lots of marker at the bottom there. It just couldn't handle that much moisture. It's not a bad blend, as you can see. And when you compare it to the bleed proof, that's also a good blend, but you've still got at the very bottom of the bleed proof, you've got a little bit of bleed, so it's perhaps not as bleed proof as it thinks it is. And you also get some of the colour on the surface, and it gets very wet at some stages. I have had it being quite patchy before when I've used it. So even though it's the thinnest of all of the papers at 70 GSM, it's actually not bled half as much as the printer paper, even though it has bled that little bit around that bottom edge. Now onto the Bristol board paper, which is the thickest of all the papers at 250 GSM, and you can see straight away that that has not bled virtually at all. I mean, it's definitely the best out of all 4 papers in terms of the bleed, and that's all 5 grey markers from number 1 at the top down to 5 at the bottom. 4 and 5 at the bottom, I'm pointing out there, I could have blended those in a little bit better, but it's a pretty good blend when you look at it from top to bottom. So lastly, we've got watercolour paper, and this is Winsor & Newton watercolour paper, 190 GSM in thickness, so not as thick as the Bristol board, but still I've used watercolour paper before with the markers, and I was really surprised at how it had bled this time, because I've used it before and it's been absolutely fine. But I think what I do that time is when I'm layering the markers on top, I let the one on the underneath dry before I apply the next one, whereas here you had 5 lots of markers applied while it was still wet, and it's quite clear at that bottom edge that the paper just couldn't cope with it, and it has all bled around that bottom edge, making me think that in future I will definitely be using Bristol board, because it seems to put up with the amount of markers that you're going to add to it much better. There's probably one drawback that I can think of in using thicker paper, and that's probably that it is going to use a lot more of your markering, absorb a lot more of your marker ink than perhaps a thinner paper would do, so your markers might run out a little bit quicker. I hope you found this video useful, and if you did, then please like, subscribe, and check out some of my other videos.